to Cosmic Confluence podcast, where we explore the edges of what it means to be human, to love, to grow, and to awaken. Now, today we are stepping into one of the most tender and mysterious territories of all, love. Not just romantic love, but love as a mirror, as a teacher, and even as a spiritual initiator. My guest today, listeners, has sat with over 44,000 souls through heartbreak, betrayal, loneliness, and the beautiful ache of love that won't quite land. With a background that began in biomedical research and medicine, his journey evolved into the realms of mysticism, Kabbalah, hypnosis, a course in miracles and altered states of consciousness. And in 2025, he was honored with the Pen and Quill Award for his novel Frank Baller Finds TH, which is a raw story of love, surrender, and self discovery. And today, he blends science, soul, and the subconscious to help people break free from painful patterns and step into relationships that actually nourish their soul. So, with that, I'm deeply honored to welcome Dr. Flavio to Cosmic Conference. So, Dr. Flavio, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored and excited to have you here with us.
Oh my gosh, Stella, thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction. Very kind and not sure it's deserved, but it was really, really nice. Thank you. And by the way, I love your work. I have heard several of your podcasts, and not only I find that you have a very pleasant voice and interviewing style, but also I think that you ask really awesome questions. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Flavio, for your kind words. Um, um, uh, you often say that, and I absolutely agree with this. I'm thankful to all the conversations because each and every conversation is an opportunity for me to learn. So most life problems are relationship problems, and I absolutely agree because not only with people around us, we are in relationship with ourselves, our souls, our work, our identity, uh, with nature, with universe, with energy. And most relationship problems, they are spiritual problems in disguise. So that's something I'm really curious to know. What does it mean, and how exactly? I mean, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for that. That's profound. So let's see if we can unpack that a little bit. So first of all, at least here in the West, you find that in our culture there is a fascination with love and sex and relationships, and we're all looking for a relationship or for a better partner. There's almost, and you can see, like, for instance, in the dating industry, like dating apps and stuff, they have
Mhm.
millions and millions of users and of all ages, and people are looking and hungry for relationships. And yet, when you talk to most people who have been in a relationship for any length of time, they'll tell you that they're not necessarily very satisfied, and they may have some issues, whatever, right? So then we
Mhm.
begin to ask ourselves, okay, what what is it that we expect out of a relationship that we're not getting? What is actually happening there? So the first thing that we notice when a couple comes to the office and the relationship is in trouble, the very first thing that we notice, and this is a model that I've been using since I started back in 1996. I've been saying that there are no relationship problems, there are personal problems that affect the relationship. Now, I'll get to the spiritual part in just a second, but let's start with the first part of that quote. There are no
Mhm.
relationship problems. And I say that because when a couple gets together, they like each other and they
Mhm.
become a couple. They have no problem becoming a couple. They don't need to come to the therapist's office to become a couple. In other words, they met somewhere, they liked each other, and they started a relationship. No problems there, right? So there are no relationship problems. They like each other. So eventually, as they get to know each other more and more and more, problems arise. And when you look at those problems as they define it, what you find is that you're really dealing with a personal problem. I'll give you an example. One person might
Mhm.
use drugs, and that may offend the other person. Those are
Yeah.
examples. But his or her use of drugs in this example is not really a relationship problem. That's a personal problem that's affecting the relationship. You might have another situation in which one party, man or woman, is promiscuous. They're cheating all the time. And then you say, well,
Mm.
we have a problem, a relationship problem. Well, we answering no, it's really a personal problem that is affecting the relationship, and on and on and on. I recently worked with a couple in which the man preferred not to work. The woman worked many hours, was very stressed, but the man
Okay.
claimed that he didn't like to work. He preferred to stay home. And of course, the wife was very stressed, and we had to unravel the reasons why that man did not like to work. So, again, when you look at cases like those, you realize that it's not really a relationship problem. It's a personal problem of some type, right? That is affecting the relationship. Okay. So that's the first part of the model. Then we go to the second one and you correctly quoted me when I say it's a spiritual problem in disguise. And what I mean by that is, you take any of those examples. You take, let's say, a person who's an alcoholic, right? A personal problem that's affecting the relationship. That alcoholism, it has some really, really deep roots in the person's unconscious. And
Mhm.
ultimately, it is some type of spiritual misunderstanding as to what the purpose for the lifetime is and so forth. So in a gross way, in a big way, I say those are
Mhm.
spiritual problems. And perhaps the word spiritual in this particular setting is slightly misused. But what I mean by that is when you do enough hypnosis, enough regressions, you can also see that people experience life in what we call the period between lifetimes. I think that in this podcast, I think that I would imagine most of your audience in this podcast would be friendly toward the idea of multiple lives, reincarnation. I think that that's a topic that is more and more widely understood and accepted. And I approach it not from a particular opinion, but from the clinical experience of thousands of sessions during which, without looking for a past life, people in deep hypnosis land in past lives naturally without me prompting. So when I discovered this, I realized, okay, if we can land in a past life, I wonder where people go in between
Mhm.
lives. And people can actually talk in deep hypnosis from the perspective of in between lives. I mean, they're not incarnated. So the point I'm making is this: when you have those conversations, not once, but hundreds, thousands of times with people in that state, you
Mhm.
realize that this lifetime of ours was prearranged in some way. In other words, we sort of make a decision. I'm going to go to the earth. I'm going to be single, married. I'm going to be a man, a woman. I'm going to be this way or that way. I'm going to be born in India or in Brazil, or maybe not down to the level of detail like that, but we sort of choose the experience that we need to live in order to learn the lesson that we believe our souls need to live. And as a result, we pick up what, from a human perspective, appears to be a problem. But in reality, from a spiritual perspective, those are opportunities for us to develop characteristics that perhaps were missing before. Does this make any sense what I'm saying, or is it too abstract and too all over the place? How do you feel about what I'm saying?
Um, I absolutely agree, with both the aspects here that yes, it is personal. It's like in a relationship, it's like the equation, if because I believe in energy, and it's the It's kind of the collision of energy or the connection between both the energy or the souls. And when we come down to the next level, which is more of a spiritual, and then the individual levels of how the spiritual aspect, how the energy works, then you're also bringing into the aspect of the different timelines, or the universes, or the forms that particular soul or spirit has taken. And of course, because I have had conversations on akashic records, understanding our higher consciousness or our soul, and then how our souls are gathering all the universe data within us. I mean, I absolutely understand it. It's not vague to me. It could be to many of the listeners, but then at least having that clarity or that openness to understand, I think it definitely opens doors to understand the practical, the tangible aspects of relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So so you've done work with the Akashic records, huh? That's interesting.
Yes, yes. I have had an episode with one of my guests where she did an Akashic record for me, and that was really, really fascinating. Really fascinating. Some of the aspects in terms of how I am more of an uh, ambivert person, and I may have some kind of someone whom I lost maybe in that particular timeline, and I kind of drowned myself in work to cope with the grief of loss. It's kind of parallel to what I could have faced a few years back.
I
So
see.
I found some relevance definitely in that.
I'm curious about something. Did it change your life or was it just interesting? In other words, were there any changes that resulted from that? And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because this ties into my work and the subject of one of my books. Did it change anything for you? Or was it just like, oh, how interesting? What would you say?
Um, so, Dr. Flavio, changed in the way that I have started to appreciate myself, not in some kind of egoistic or a sense of bravado, but appreciating my flaws, and as a soul, that yes, this is how I am, this is who I am, and I'm my soul is beautiful, and I should definitely accept the flaws here, and appreciate the good part of it as well. But then also at the same time, um, I should also be cautious about the bad parts. For example, in that particular Akashic reading, the guest mentioned about a particular stomach related health issue that I had, and how that particular person from that timeline where my soul is, he is telling me that just be cautious of your gut issues, or your issues related to stomach. So both the aspects.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that part of your experience. And the reason I was asking is because I've written a few books, one of which is called The Philosophy of Therapy. And in that book, I articulate a number of ideas that I believe could be useful to therapists of all modalities, not just hypnotherapists, but physical therapists, medical therapy. I mean, all kinds of therapies. And so I define therapy and I look for the philosophical the philosophical foundations of what constitutes therapy. So it's a book on philosophy. I have a degree in philosophy and enjoy that kind of exercise. But
Wow.
what's interesting is that in that book, I differentiate between, and I mention it as a hypothesis in the book, and I say that, when I go into hypnosis and I come up with something that happened to me, let's say that I go into hypnosis and I remember that when I was 5 years old, I fell and bumped my head, right? And this is why I have headaches today. This is just an example. I'm making up the story that didn't happen to me. But what I mention as a hypothesis is that me recalling that experience is different from you knowing what happened to me and telling me what happened to me. In other words, if the information comes from within, we call this endogenous source versus exogenous. In other words, it came from someone else. So let's say that someone else knows what happens, whether they have some psychic abilities or they happen to have been there or they watched a video of it, whatever. So they tell me, oh, what happened to you was that when you were 5 years old, you fell and bumped your head. That information comes into my mind from the outside in. Whereas if I'm in hypnosis and I recall in hypnosis falling at the age of 5 years and bumping my head, the effect of those two experiences, I claim, is different. So, namely, if I recall it, there may be a strong emotional catharsis which may release any problems that I might still be holding on to. Whereas when somebody tells me from the outside in, the emotional impact of that information is much smaller. So this is a hypothesis of mine which I present in that book. And because it's an important topic to me, I always ask people, what was the effect in your life? Because we can hear all kinds of things about us, right? I can go to a medium or to a psychic or to some type of person who has some special ability, and many of them are quite genuine and quite sincere. And they might tell me all kinds of things about my life. Oh, in a past life, you were a warrior. In a past life, you were a woman. You're a man. You're a this. You're that. A criminal. Whatever the case might be. And all of that could be, let's assume that all of it is absolutely 100% true. The question that I ask is, how does that change my present experience? You know, so yeah. So I was just asking because of that. It's like my own private little survey here. Like, okay, when we're told about our past or about our spirituality, does it change much or not? That I was just curious about that, and thank you for sharing that piece of information.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, and I do understand that. I do understand that. And also, Dr. Flavio, another aspect of your work, I have heard about A Course in Miracles, but you also integrate Kabbalah into your work. Um, if you can explain, maybe just kind of give a glimpse into this in the interest of time. But how does this perspective change with both of these aspects? How we approach love, especially when we have uh, or when we are feeling abandoned or betrayed.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So, those two ideas that you mentioned, Kabbalah and of course in miracles, seem to be quite different. They come from different origins. They have different, they're two very different things. And each one of those could become a lifetime of study, and we still wouldn't know all there is to either one of those topics. So, what happened was I was a part of a school of mystical arts for many, many years. And in that school, this was an eclectic school. We studied many topics, perhaps not with the same depth that a true rabbi would study Kabbalah, but we would do months at a time only studying Kabbalah, then change over and do a few months of A Course in Miracles, and then change over and do a few months of alchemy, and then change, in other words, like that for years, and also rotate through some topics of mystical relevance. So this is why I became interested in two or three of these topics, such as alchemy, A Course in Miracles, and Kabbalah. other topics were discussed, and I never got too much into it, but those are topics that I developed a particular predilection toward. But Kabbalah
Mm.
is an ancient field of study. It's more associated with the Jewish group, and the word Kabbalah comes from the word in Hebrew kibel, which means to receive, and it's really the art and science of receiving light. And what we mean by light, well, it's what you and I would call love, but particularly the love from the Creator to us humans. So the idea of receiving the love, the light, right? So Kabbalah would say, so Kabbalah is a huge field of study, but in a nutshell, we would say in Kabbalah that the purpose for our lives in general is to receive the love from the Creator and manifest it or create it here on the earth. In other words, the earth is a dark place. And by dark, we mean the earth is a place devoid of love. It's a place where love is missing, let's say, or light is missing. So every time that we can create light or love here on the earth, we're doing we're practicing the reason for which we were born, and we're becoming a little bit more God-like. The purpose is to eventually become one with God. That, of course, might take billions of years, whatever the case might be. But at that instant, when we are manifesting their love, at that instant, it is like we are very similar to God. And the more we do of that, the more godlike we become. So, in a nutshell, that's the idea of Kabbalah. Now, of course, in miracles comes from the early 1970s, I think. There was this professor at Columbia University, I believe, in New York, who started hearing voices. And now she was a professor of psychology. And as such, the idea of hearing voices seemed very strange and dangerous to her. But
Okay.
in accordance with the suggestion she received from another friend of hers who was also a professor of psychology, they started typing up whatever she was hearing in her head. She was hearing these voices and she started to take those notes and do what the voice was telling her to do. And they did that for years. And the compilation of all of those notes became what we know of today as what A Course in Miracles. Now, A Course in Miracles, if we were to summarize, it's a very lengthy, it's like 5 different books into one, whatever. If we were to take all of that into, in a minute here, it is really the idea of forgiveness,
Mm.
how to forgive, how to change our minds about anger, about resentment, how to actually forgive. Because, according to A Course in Miracles, when we forgive, we're becoming more God like. So it ties in a beautiful way with what we learn in Kabbalah. And it approaches the whole topic from an entirely different point of view. However, it goes toward the same goal, the same ideas. So I love that combination. And I still study both of those ideas back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I love the comparison because oftentimes I can understand a particular topic better when I look at it both from a Kabbalistic perspective and from the perspective of A Course in Miracles. Now, more specifically, when it comes to relationships, A Course in Miracles has a very, very interesting description or idea, or a chapter, if you will. It's not quite called a chapter, but it has a subtopic within the Course in Miracles that specifically applies toward relationships that I find to be fascinating. And that is the distinction that they make between special relationships and holy relationships. That's how they call it. So a
Mhm.
special relationship is one in which there is almost like a transaction. I'll do a few things for you if you do a few things for me. Most
Mhm.
relationships in our culture here in the West are special relationships as A Course in Miracle defines them. In other words, it is a relationship of convenience. I'll take care
Right.
of you, but you have to take care of me. we do each other favors in a sense, right? In
Mm.
contrast to what A Course in Miracle calls a holy relationship, which would be much more based on the idea of love in a spiritual sense. And what that means is that we give light or love toward one another without attempting to receive anything in return. Now, we don't know how to do that perfectly or fully because we're humans, but the extent to which we can transform our relationships from special to holy, the extent to which we can do that is the extent to which we are growing spiritually, according to A Course in Miracles. So I find it to be a fascinating idea and one quite relevant to the work with relationships or singles or couples at the office. I find it to work really, really well.
Wow, that's such a beautiful explanation, Dr. Flavio. Especially thank you for making me revisit A Course in Miracles. And I believe even if it's different cultures, the origin stories are different. Um, but the basic, the fundamental, concept or the fundamental vision is the oneness. It revolves around love. And it's like a relationship with divine, which is our most primary relationship. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yes, I thank you for the opportunity to share these ideas and I applaud your work so much. Yes.
Lovely, lovely. So before we wrap up, Dr. Flavio, um, many of our listeners are seekers, including me. And we are actively working on ourselves, but we may still struggle to find um, the person within us. So what shifts when someone truly is ready for conscious love? I mean, what changes internally that allows love to finally land?
So, in practice, I think that there are two answers to your question. Another fantastic question, by the way. I think that there's a theoretical answer, and in my view, there's like a practical answer in terms of what happens most frequently. The theoretical answer is what shift is what shifts is the perspective that what we're looking for is outside of us to the
Mhm,
perspective that what I'm looking for is inside of me. So I might be unhappy because I don't have a spouse. I'm giving you this as an example, right? So I'm looking for a spouse or a partner
mhm,
out there in the world. That's one perspective. When we shift that into a different perspective, which is, yes, I'm missing something, but what I'm missing is actually inside of me. When that shift takes place, then everything changes for the person. I would say that's the theoretical answer. And I say that because in practice, it's very difficult to go through that transition or that transformation just because, just, oh, one day I woke up and I decided to look within, it typically, or at least in our culture, it doesn't happen as often. More often, what we find is that a person goes into a crisis. In other words,
mhm,
they have a life, they're doing whatever they're doing. Suddenly, something terrible happens and to them or to somebody they love or whatever, and they have a crisis, a personal crisis, and they embark on a journey to solve the problem or to fix the pain or to heal from that crisis. And along the process of healing and changing, they discover something about themselves that they didn't have before. So that perspective will shift from looking out there for what I want and need to a perspective of looking in here for what I want and need. But it usually, in practice, commonly happens following some type of crisis. And you see this in the biblical record, you see this in life, you see this in therapy, you see this all over the place. Usually, when we're doing really well in life, we don't really worry too much about, looking within usually, right? But
Yeah.
when there's a severe crisis, that's when we begin looking, usually.
That's so true. Or maybe this is the, uh, uh, and whatever you call it's God or it's the divine power or the higher power up there. It's their way of making us grounded, grounded and centered. Um, Going through bad, worst times, however, uplifting ourselves to understand the true beauty of life, love.
Yes, I think so. I think so. And as an example, in the biblical record, in the New Testament, there's a story, and this is just an example. There are many, many such stories all over the literature and poetry. In this example, one that comes to mind is a story in the Bible that says that Jesus was baptized. And upon
Mhm.
receiving the Holy Spirit, it says, the Bible says that the Spirit took him into the desert to be tempted by the devil. So we can take those words literally. Jesus was baptized, he went to the desert, or some people choose to take those words in a sort of metaphorical sense,
Yeah.
and we can put
Mm.
ourselves in that situation and say, okay, when everything is good, the Spirit takes me to the desert to face the devil. That's a fascinating idea because it shows that our problems, and we could say that going into the desert, facing
Mhm.
the devil, is like having a crisis, right? It's like in our modern day, would be like saying, I had a huge crisis. I
Yeah.
was in the desert facing the devil, metaphorically speaking. Well, who took me there? The Spirit, and the Spirit is a part of God. So the point I'm making here is that all of these ideas point in the same direction. The crisis that we have, the pain, the problems are, are a big part of life. A big part of life. The Spirit takes us into the desert to face the devil. So it's a big part of the process of waking up, learning, finding ourselves. It's all over literature. It's in the biblical record. It's in Kabbalah. It's in A Course in Miracles. It's a part of life.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, Dr. Flavio, if our listeners would like to connect with you, what will be the best way?
Well, the best way would be my website because I have you can send me an email or a WhatsApp message right on my website. Every page has a WhatsApp button, and you can use that to send me a message. And there's a ton of information there on my website about what I do and advice and suggestions, whatever that you can use. I have books on Amazon. If you just look up on Amazon my name, you'll find a few books there. And my website is awesome relations dot life. Awesome relations, one word, dot life.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to have all the details in the show notes for our listeners. And Dr. Flavio, this conversation, uh, it definitely reminded me that love is far more than just an emotion. It is definitely a sacred practice. It's a healing path, and ultimately, it's a homecoming for us. So, thank you so much for being the guiding light through the labyrinth of the heart with such depth, calmness, compassion, and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I really, like I said earlier, I really love your work. Thank you so much for the opportunity and mega blessings to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flavia. And thank you to all of our listeners for being a part of this beautiful cosmic journey. And I would just like to say that may you hold your own journey with tenderness, knowing that every ache, every longing, every relationship, even the difficult ones, they are shaping you for the love that's meant for you. Until next time, this is Cosmic Confluence with Love, your host, Sana. Thank you.